Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My questions are for Ms. Parker. First one's really a two-part question. In your testimony, you discussed the high costs of offshore wind. On a cost per year kilowatt-hour basis, I'm interested in knowing how much it cost as compared to other forms, and also on the consumer's ability to pay their electric bills.
Essentially, offshore wind is not just more expensive than conventional energy or current market, but also more expensive than an alternative like land-based wind. So, for example, in Massachusetts, we have two big utilities, NSTAR and National Grid. NSTAR went through a competitive solicitation to satisfy a Massachusetts law called the Green Communities Act, and they ended up securing 3 land-based wind projects that came in at about 9 to 10 cents per kilowatt hour, and they were fixed over time. Cape Wind, by contrast, starts at 19 cents per kilowatt hour, is guaranteed an annual escalator of 3.5%, and ends up at 31 cents per kilowatt hour. So you're looking at 25 cents on average versus about 9 or 10 for land versus current market rates of about 7. The net effect of that is for 3/4 of Cape Wind's power, Massachusetts households, businesses, and municipalities will be saddled with an additional $3 billion of cost.
Wow, that's staggering, truly. Have you seen any evidence that the rules and regulations have been bent or ignored in Cape Wind?
Absolutely. There's been a strong pattern of that. In fact, we have a timeline of all the events that have happened in the 12-year review of Cape Wind, and I'd be happy to submit that if the record's still open. But just to give you a few, in the Coast Guard, they had originally recommended safe separation zones between the turbines and navigational routes. Those were essentially abandoned, we saw through FOIA responses, because the Coast Guard appeared to be concerned about Cape Wind's bottom line and the fact that imposing these kind of buffer zones would remove some of the turbines from the footprint and hurt the economics of Cape Wind. This is an agency with a safety-first mandate that is concerned about the economics and bottom line of Cape Wind. We've also seen more recently Coast Guard reports that have come out recommending or saying that anything closer to 1 nautical mile between a route and a turbine is unacceptable from a risk perspective. For Cape Wind, it's not 1 nautical mile, it's 2/10 of 1 nautical mile, that close to the turbines. So clearly rules that have been applied in other places have been ignored in the case of Cape Wind. And again, there's numerous examples, and if I could, I'd be happy to submit a timeline with additional examples.
I would appreciate it if you would, Mr. Chairman, with your permission. Is there any evidence, that now it begs for the next question, is there any evidence that those in charge of the rulings and decisions were subject to any influence by interested parties?
As I mentioned previously, we had received a number of FOIA documents from the FAA, which showed that the FAA felt they were under political pressure. There was a PowerPoint presentation that stated, I'm paraphrasing, but something to the effect of, the administration has a strong green energy agenda. Secretary Salazar has already approved the project. It would be difficult for us politically to refuse approval of the project. There were enough of those types of emails and documents that it ended up having a congressional investigation by the House Oversight Committee and requested additional documents from the FAA. So that's just one example, and I think when you look at all the different agencies, there is definitely a very strong pattern of a predetermined outcome. We need to approve Cape Wind, figure out how to make it happen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Posey.